I'll hand the floor over to you, Fernanda and Martin.
Okay, thank you so much. So first off, thank you for having us here and for working so hard to be able to hear us. We hope we will be entertaining and provocative. I'm Fernanda Viégas, and this is my colleague, Martin Wattenberg. We're both professors at Harvard of computer science with a joint appointment at the Harvard Business School. And today we're going to talk about the aura of ones and zeros.
Thank you. Yeah, I wish we could be there, but okay. So what is aura? Aura is a term coined by Walter Benjamin in 1935 in a famous book musing about what it meant to have art when you could reproduce it easily. And to him, aura was exactly what makes a piece of art unique and situated. And it was very often a function of distance in some sense. In fact, when Ari was describing the Mona Lisa and the 10 tourist deep wall, that exactly is the distance that creates aura. Now, I have a personal memory from the world of internet art in the 1990s, where I spent some time, that there was a lot of worrying among artists about the aura of digital art. And to some extent, this was about making money, but also it was about what makes it art. Next slide. And so what we'd like to talk about today are what are the NFT's artistic affordances? What does it offer to artists, and what can we do with this new medium? And we're going to do this by really talking much more about history than NFTs. Next slide. So an analogy for me is something called form art. This is created by Alexei Shulgin, an artist in 1997. And what you're seeing here are some screenshots of form art. And what he did is he took HTML form elements, which back then very few people were familiar with. You know, you were likely a physicist or some other, computer scientist or mathematician sort of weird person. And he used them, instead of making a business form, he used them to draw pictures, basically doing what artists have done in other media. And in some sense, this looks dated now, partly because of the Netscape frames. But there's another reason as well, is we no longer use form elements to draw pictures, interesting though it is. But what is not dated is the message here, which is that the web was an artistic medium. That is a brilliant message, and it was very, very controversial at the time. So keep this analogy in mind. Okay, let's talk about some NFTs a little bit. Next slide. Okay, what is one major genre of NFTs? We see generative art, and I love this art. This is something that a medium I've worked in, not in the NFT context. I love the fact that we see it proliferating today. And the interesting thing about generative art is that it's got a long history. This idea of you set a process in motion with certain inputs and then you get certain outputs, that goes back a ways. Next slide. For example, Salouet, a famous artist who would create beautiful works like this. This is sort of a wall painting. And what he would do is he wouldn't necessarily paint things himself or draw things himself, but he would create instruction sets. Next slide. So for example, this is Lewitt's wall drawing 797. And it's essentially it's almost like a computer program, but it's aimed at human drafters. And in this case, you can actually try to picture this in your mind, that someone draws a black horizontal line that's a little irregular, and then 3 other people with markers that are red and blue and yellow copy that line over and over again, drawing a line below another line below another line. And try to imagine what that looks like in your head. Next slide. This is what it looks like in reality. And it creates this beautiful composition. Again, the artwork here, this is just a manifestation of the artwork. The real piece of art for Salouet was those instructions. Next slide. Okay, so we've seen generative art has existed before. What about invisible art? One of the things that people talk about with NFTs, sometimes in a tone of disbelief, is how can art be a pointer that points to something and it might not even exist? Well, that also has quite a history. Next slide. So for example, just recently, there was a sculptor who sold an invisible sculpture for more than $18,000. What happened when he did that? Next slide. He got sued. He got sued by a man in Florida who said, no, I made an invisible sculpture in 2016. You took my idea. But that was really, not very far back in history. But, next slide, please. Here's another example of invisible art. Tom Friedman in 1992, very enterprising. He found a professional witch, someone who would do curses for money. And the artist paid the witch to curse a sphere of air hovering 11 inches above this pedestal. And that became the object of art. Okay, but of course, invisible art goes back even further than that. Next slide. Salvador Dali. He did a lot with invisible art. He liked to play with providence. And he had a saying. He said, each morning after breakfast, I like to start the day by earning $20,000. Who doesn't really? And so what he did is in the 1960s, he began selling blank sheets of paper signed with his name. And he really did make a lot of money because they would sell for like $40 each, a lot of money back then especially. And he could sign more than 1,000 of these in an hour. And this has caused endless controversy. You could ask, is that a scam? That then it's caused a lot of confusion around, what's a forgery, what isn't, what is a real dog? Or was it art? He was a prankster by nature. And in some sense, as much as it made him money, he may also have been relishing some of the confusion it caused.
Okay, so now let's talk about a different phenomenon that we're seeing. Destroying art to make art. So this is something we're starting to see it in NFT land. So for instance, cryptocurrency entrepreneur destroyed a 10 million Frida Kahlo drawing to transition it into the metaverse, or even artists themselves. So for instance, Damien Hirst will burn thousands of paintings in NFT experiment. And you may be asking, is this something that is happening in the world of NFTs? Why are people doing this? Is this a crazy thing? And just as Martin was giving you previous examples, this is true here as well. So for instance, this is a piece of conceptual art called Erased de Kooning Drawing by Robert Rauschenberg from 1953. And basically, Rauschenberg was interested in understanding, is an artist a creator? And in creating things, is it a buildup of marks on top of a page or a canvas? Or can the artist also take away marks, take away things? So basically, he started erasing his own work. But then, as you see on the quote here, Rauschenberg first tried erasing his own drawings, but ultimately decided that in order for the experiment to succeed, he had to begin with an artwork that was undeniably significant in its own right. And that's when he approached William de Kooning, whom he greatly respected and admired, and said, can you please give me one of your pieces so I can erase them? I can erase it. And so that's what he did and framed the erased drawing. Another example is what you see here, this jar of cookies, which is actually called Cremation Project with Corpus Wafers by John Baldessari. And what is happening here is that Baldessari was unhappy with some of his early works, decided to cremate them. And not only that, he then used the ashes to bake cookies. And those are the cookies you see here. Another example is this dropping a Han Dynasty urn by Ai Weiwei from 1995. And the work is basically the three photographs, the sequence of photographs you see here of the artist himself dropping a very valuable ancient urn. So this is an urn that was worth over $1 million. And you may be asking yourselves, what is going on here? So part of the concept of this piece was Weiwei drawing a connection between what he was doing with this urn with what the communist regime was doing to the elites. So there's obviously a political commentary here. But again, this is something that one artist is doing to a piece that they didn't create themselves. So this whole question about creation and destruction, what is art, what is the limit of art, is something that has happened many times before. My final example is this Banksy piece called Girl with Balloon, which comes from a stencil graffiti piece that he had in London. But this is a paper version. And this was a piece that was auctioned at Sotheby's in 2018. And moments after, the auction was over and the painting was sold for over $1 million, the painting started sliding down its frame through a shredder. So it got halfway shredded, which is what you can see on the right here. And this is something that the artist himself put in as part of the frame. So again, the concept is not new, maybe a new medium to play with, but the concept itself exists. And finally, this final piece here where Piero Manzoni canned his own poop. And guess what? We saw the same happen last year, 2021, with NFTs. So have we reached peak copying conceptual art? And this is something, just to take a step back, it's not just something that is happening with NFTs. This tends to happen anytime we move from a traditional medium to a new medium. For instance, when photography came around, artists who were interested in photography and understanding what is this thing that makes pictures, it turns out they felt that they needed to have photographs that resembled paintings because that's what they were familiar with and what their audiences were familiar with. When the printing press came out, people felt that books needed to look like the manuscripts that monks would create, because again, that's what we're familiar with. So I think part of what you're seeing here is this going back to what's familiar.
Okay. So yeah, back to the analogy with form art. So I would argue that much of NFT art today is like this form art in the sense it is brilliant, it is importing ideas from other media, but to me, the real question is what is the future going to look like? So next slide. I think let's go back to this quote about what withers in the age of mechanical reproduction, but why imitate other kinds of art? For true aura of NFTs, we have to say, what does not wither in the age of the blockchain? And there, I would say, it's anything to do with the blockchain itself, just as internet art really began to take off when people used the special things you could do with the internet. And I think the art that Ari was introducing earlier that you can see in the gallery are excellent examples of this, of figuring out ways for things to be situated, for artworks to know about their own ownership in some sense and have control of it. I think these kinds of explorations are, to me, as an artist, especially exciting. So I think we'll end there. And yes, thank you very much.
If somebody wants to ask a question, I think we can relay it to the speaker. Any questions? We have a surprise question here. What was your aha moment? Sorry, can you hear?
Was the question, what was our aha moment?
That's correct, yep.
So, it's interesting because I felt like I was following NFTs pretty early just because there's a lot of experimentation. It's like internet art at one point was called new media art. In a sense, it's like everyone's looking at new forms of media. So it's interesting to me for that reason. But the aha moment was watching artist after artist that I have huge respect for start working in this medium. And then the thing that I noticed is I felt like I was seeing just on Twitter even, people posting more and more stuff. And so my aha moment was there's something about this medium that is causing more of the art I like, specifically generative art is where I sort of start from. I'm like, the fact that it is making more of this happen is really interesting to me, and I like that. I don't know, Fernanda, would you?
Yeah, I think I took solace in understanding, in gaining perspective from art history in terms of the fact that we are seeing so many different things happen right now. The fact that they have happened before gave me a lot of calm
Yeah.
in seeing a lot of what was happening.
I will say that questions of energy use have always been at the forefront of this, and it's one of the very complicating factors. And it's great to see, you know, proof of stake coming to fruition in various ways. So yeah, I think it's a very complicated thing. I would say there has not been a single aha moment, but a series of them is, I guess, how I would summarize.
Okay, thank you very much.